Alright, this video is over section 1 of chapter 16. The main topic here is about how human population growth can be affected by resources. We know that technology has been a great thing, that it's extended the lifespan of the average human on this planet. But we should also realize that with that technology, a lot of resources are being used up in the process of making our lives easier, and we're running out of those things. So we need to think about that a little bit. So one of the main topics here is just renewable versus non-renewable resources. I'm guessing this is something that you guys have talked about before in other classes. So the first thing we talk about is what's the difference between a renewable and non-renewable resource. Right? A lot of times a renewable resource is just something that's abundant. It's something like sunlight that's just always going to be there for those plants so that they can do photosynthesis, right? If it did disappear, we'd be kind of out of luck anyway, but it could technically run out, but generally day to day there's plenty of sunlight. It's really abundant. We're not going to run out of that. Whereas a non-renewable resource is going to be something that's used faster than it's replaced. So a non-renewable resource would be something like a fossil fuel, burning gas to get from point A to point B, to get from Gordon to Rushville and back to Gordon. Right? That resource is non-renewable. It takes millions and millions of years for that organic matter to turn into a fossil fuel, and we're burning it way faster than it could ever be replaced. Understand that almost everything you do on a day-to-day basis depends on those fossil fuels, whether it's the plastic that's in your phone or the power that runs your phone or the power that runs all the technology in this classroom, including the lights in the room. Right? We're using those fossil fuels constantly. We need to find some other alternate resource at the end of the day, because we are running out of those things, and when we do, our carrying capacity that we haven't reached yet for humans is going to drop off drastically, and we're going to see a lot of people dying in that process. A lot of times when it comes to resources, it comes down to context. Because some use of a resource can be renewable versus others that's non-renewable. Take using trees for building materials, right? Using wood for building materials. You can either choose to selectively cut down trees, some of which that were already dying and needed to be pruned out of the forest anyway, versus deforestation, where you just flat clear cut everything in the vicinity and just completely destroy a habitat. Obviously, one version is a lot more responsible than the other. If you're selective cutting and then you're planning to replace those trees that are lost, you're using that resource responsibly, and that would make it a renewable resource. But if you're just cutting down the entire forest to use all that wood, that's definitely an example of non-renewable resources. You can't do that forever and expect to still have that resource available. The other thing that goes with this section is an ecological footprint. And most of that just comes down to understanding that we use more and more resources anymore because of that increase in technology. Right? So you have developed countries like our own. They're going to use lots and lots of technology, and that technology is great. It's increasing our carrying capacity. It's making it so we can live longer and we can live easier. But the more and more technology that's used, the faster and faster we use all those resources. So that use of technology leads to a bigger footprint for someone who lives in a developed country, meaning that per person, we use a lot more resources in our country than people do in a third world country somewhere else. They use a lot less resources than you do because they don't have a cell phone to charge every day. They don't use the same things that you would use every day, and they don't necessarily need those things either. But for our sake and our comfort, we like that technology, so we have a much bigger footprint because of it. So we're running out of resources. That being said, even though our country does have a relatively high footprint because of the use of technology, that doesn't mean that people in third world countries aren't using resources. Because if you have millions of feet running around, right, there are some pretty highly populated countries out there that don't necessarily use a whole lot of technology. With more and more people, they're still going to use a lot of resources. So it's an issue regardless of where you're at. Right? We do have a bigger footprint here in our country, but there's lots of people on this planet, and it wouldn't matter if you had a huge footprint or not. We're still going to run out of some resources eventually, so we have to deal with that. Okay, so that does it for this section.